Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Colchester and Ipswich Museum Services online seminar series exploring decolonisation and democratisation. I'm Izzy and I'll be your chair for today. As with our other sessions, if you have any questions you'd like to ask our speakers, please pop them in the chat function to your right. Each speaker is going to have around 20 minutes and then there'll be a chance for a Q&A session at the end, providing we don't overrun. You can also join in the conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag #CultureDND. Today, we're joined by Katherine and Stephanie from the Courtauld Institute, who will be speaking about democratising loans and exhibitions through their National Partners Programme. We're also joined by Ben Paites from Colchester Museums, who will be talking about the way they worked with communities on the exhibition Adorn. I'd also like to give a mention to Helen Mears from Brighton Museums. So Helen was originally scheduled to take part in today, but unfortunately due to the current lockdown and furloughs, this wasn't possible. But please do check out the Making African Connections project that Helen was going to be talking to us about. I think my technical colleague Lib will be putting a comment in the links. But back to today, I'd like you all to welcome our first speaker, Ben. So Ben, if you're ready, please proceed.
Hello, everyone. So as Izzy said, I am taking over from Helen, who unfortunately couldn't present in the end today. She had a very interesting talk lined up. So be aware that my presentation might be a bit shorter than others and a bit broader. And as Izzy mentioned, I'll be looking a little bit about how we engage with communities with Adorn, but I'll be kind of looking more broadly at ways in which we've given over power to the people that we've worked with outside of the museum institution itself, as I try and get the slides up. There we go. There we are. So I'm going to be looking at 4 key kind of aspects in terms of handing over power. This sort of trickles into some of the things that will be discussed next week with some of our future speakers, but I will be trying to keep it focused on looking beyond the museum's walls, which is the focus for the session today. So one thing I'll be looking at is intersectional approaches. So looking at identity rather than just single characteristics, how we've engaged with various partners and individuals on projects in the museum without focusing on one characteristic that they might be representing. Looking at participant voices, so how do we present the experiences and the opinions and the knowledge of these people in our displays. Supportive museums, so how museums can be used to support other organisations. It's not just about them coming and doing work for us. And going digital, which is particularly relevant nowadays after this year, how museums and particularly how we have been looking at a digital platform to help expand and extend our reach beyond the museum walls. So thinking of intersectional approaches, all of us are made up of lots of different characteristics. We are not just one thing, although one thing might be a kind of predominant focus for an exhibition or a display or a project. It's important to ensure that the individuals who are taking part in those projects and exhibitions are represented as fully as possible, because it will be a whole host of reasons why their life experiences, their backgrounds will have influenced their life stories and the stories that they'll be sharing with you in those exhibitions. And also, I don't say stop tick boxing because it's not going to happen. Unfortunately, we're reliant on funders and other places that will require us to tick some boxes, but try to avoid doing things for the sake of ticking those boxes, looking at a more holistic way of engaging with different people. I'm trying to avoid the term communities because communities is quite a divisive term sometimes. We want to see, because the people we work with belong to multiple communities sometimes. So how do we ensure that those people's lives and stories are represented as fully as possible? So this started very, very briefly. We'll talk about a few years ago. Colchester Museums were looking at how we could engage with different groups we hadn't engaged with before. And one of those ideas was to do an LGBT exhibition. And so I set up a focus group and got some people together, as you always do. And it was very clear early on that that was something that the LGBT representatives in that room did not want. So I will be talking about some of the failures we've had today as well. It's not just those success stories. So we went to those groups and they kind of said, no, we don't want that. And this is where we started to think about intersectionality as a thing that should be more representative in museums. The main reason they said they didn't want to have an LGBT exhibition is because those participating and those visiting might be outing themselves by being involved in such a thing, which could have potentially negative impacts on their lives outside of the museum. So we started to think about what we could do instead. And as a museum and myself as an archaeologist, I started to think about the ways in which we use objects to tell stories of people and how we could do an exhibition using objects to tell the stories of people. So we had We Are Colchester. And We Are Colchester was an exhibition that looked at the lives of people in Colchester and how an object, or perhaps a couple of objects, was reflective of them as individuals. And that could bring together a lot of different characteristics and things. The dress on the left was loaned to us by an individual, a local performance artist in Colchester, who presents either as Darren Gooding or Alice de Lumiere in various different guises. And the dress is something that Alice would wear for performances quite often. We had objects that were kind of linked to different people from across Colchester who perhaps, so for example, the image in the middle, the participants decided not to include their names. They didn't want to be included in the exhibition, but their story was included. All of the text that went into the exhibition was written by them. And this was done in their own homes. This wasn't done, we didn't bring them in, we didn't kind of make them write it in front of us. We allowed them as much free creativity as they wanted. We gave them a text limit, and that was then included within the exhibition space. The only editing that was done was to make sure that there weren't any swear words or any offensive language that might be included in the text by accident that could cause offense to others. But there was none of that anyway. The exhibition then led on to other things. As I said, stop tick boxing. Unfortunately, sometimes we do tick box, especially if it's for commemorative purposes. So to commemorate the representation of the People's Act, we had a display looking at women and the history of women in Colchester. But I decided to focus on a single object for this as inspiration, which was in fact a handkerchief. So the handkerchief was created in the 1880s. And it was looking at what life might be like if women were given equal rights and the vote in a kind of anti-suffrage way. So the idea would be that while the women were in the army or doing science or learning, the men would be stuck at home doing the laundry and doing various other things, which was, of course, horrific for a man to even consider doing back in the 1800s. So what I decided to do is look at women in Colchester who are in the roles that were on that handkerchief and ask them how they felt their kind of and their lives were kind of influenced by those different roles, and how as a woman getting into those roles was in the 21st century. So we had quite a range of responses. We had representatives from science, representatives from law, representatives from higher education, from the armed forces. And once again, we gave the voice over to the people who were sharing their objects and sharing their stories. They were completely in control of the text that went into that exhibition. Once again, with the museum only editing what we thought in terms of making sure there were no swear words or anything. And it was really successful. And we had quite a lot of good responses from visitors to that display as well, looking at how gender in today's society affects a whole host of different things. And what was interesting, we had a lot of responses from children as well, and how younger people feel that society limits them or kind of forces them down into certain roles, certain jobs. And we had our light bulb wall up, which was around the idea of a light bulb moment, which is where the first time you kind of realize that how gender has affected you in some way. So as a man, when I was younger, I was told not to play with dolls, not to do kind of girls things, and I was forced to try and play football and things like that, which I absolutely hated. So we kind of realized that actually our genders are kind of, society is forcing us to go down certain routes. But we wanted to make sure, and we continue try to make sure, whenever we have individuals who don't work in the museums represented in our displays and exhibitions, we try and make sure that their voices are fully represented. So some of that work, in sense of this talk today, will be done outside the museum's walls. This will be entirely up to them as to what's included. So speaking of voices, the other thing to think about, and that we're thinking about quite a lot at Colchester Museums, is the participant voices. So who is speaking and who is and what is the story that's being told. So the creative voice is the classic voice that you see in every museum and in every display. Like I said, with the previous displays, there wasn't a curator voice. The text was entirely done by the people about their objects. There was a slight introduction just saying what the exhibition was that was done by us. But in terms of the main content and the contextualization of the exhibition and the objects, that was entirely done by the participants. We have object voice, which is something that some places are starting to look at. The National Trust recently looking at how materials in their collections have colonial links. That's looking at object voice. So the objects in themselves, regardless of who owned them, who used them, who made them, their materiality has links to fascinating, sometimes horrific stories that need to be told in museums today. And that's something that we're working in Colchester as well. And then the other thing is the user's voice, or the owner's voice, or the maker's voice, perhaps, which is something that we've done as well. So in terms of curator voice, it's the classic thing that you pick out some objects from your stores, you write a label, maybe a bit of text contextualizing all of them together, and then that goes out. And you kind of hope that the visitors and the members of the public who are looking at it can understand the wider narrative that you're trying to put across. And it still serves a purpose, that still serves a kind of a thing that museums should be and need to be doing, is to kind of putting out our own interpretation, but also making it clear that we're fallible and that the information we're putting out isn't necessarily concrete, as history and science and various other subjects are, but to kind of prompt discussion and stimulate kind of conversations around subjects more than anything else. Object voice is something else that we're looking at, as I mentioned, looking at the materiality of objects, and something that we're looking to do in Colchester Castle quite soon is to look at the ways in which our objects can tell stories on their own about Black history and about kind of the legacy of empire. So this lovely pendant has been used already in some training that we've been providing for Share Museums East in the region, looking at how to decolonize objects. So the gold, medieval gold, about 10% of the world's gold in the later medieval period came from West Africa. So anyone who's got museum collections with medieval gold, there is a strong likelihood that that gold could have come from West Africa. So that's a way you can engage with your visitors, looking at West African trade links in the medieval period. Diamonds equally have links to Africa, and rubies from other parts of the world. You can use the materials in your collections to start those conversations. We've also had some of our participants giving the voices to their objects. So with We Are Colchester, Alice actually produced a film and performance piece wearing the dress in the case, which will hopefully, I don't think it's on their page at the moment, but there is another piece that Alice did as part of our Adorn exhibition that is up there, kind of giving voices to the objects that are in the display cases. And this was a really interesting way of doing that. And the piece kind of talks from the perspective of the dress and how it ended up on display. And in a way, kind of looking at the individual, the owner's history and story, but from the perspective of the dress, which is quite an interesting approach. And then finally is having the makers or the users or the wearers story as well. So with Adorn, which was our major exhibition that ended at the beginning of the year, looking at jewelry and personal adornment, we had various makers telling their stories in the displays alongside the objects that they produced. So each of them take different techniques, different approaches, have different inspiration. And once again, like with the other displays I mentioned, we allowed them full control of what text, what kind of stories ended up in those displays. Museums are also supportive spaces. So what we need to be doing is speaking to our colleagues, our partners, our organizations surrounding us, our communities, if you want to call them that, the people who visit us and want to work with us, and see what they need, and to make it transparent as to what we can offer. So sometimes a space is all that's needed or all that can be offered, and sometimes that's enough. Sometimes there is more that we can provide. And how do we respond in situations like the one we find ourselves in now? Do we focus on our continued program, or do we try and adapt and make specific kind of responses to situations that happen? And I know next week Ipswich Museums will be talking about a specific thing that was happening in line with this, but I'm going to talk about a couple of things that we've done in Colchester as well. So we had the pandemic this year, and museums had to adapt quite quickly, and definitely going beyond our walls was something we had to do. So both in Colchester and Ipswich, we created activity packs that went out to groups in the kind of surrounding communities. In Colchester, we decided to work with kind of organizations that would help distribute and specifically target individuals who might be most at need. We realized very early on that a lot of museums were producing digital content, which is great, but not everyone has access to even the internet, if not printing and other things. So we wanted to get physical things out to the people that needed them and could benefit from them. So in Colchester, I worked with various partners in the town, the other national portfolio organisations and other arts and heritage venues, and we created a pack that could be done in the home with just a pencil and paper as a kind of minimum requirement. And so you could do that whenever you want while everyone was stuck in lockdown. We've also had community groups responding from a distance to some of the programs that we've got at the moment. So currently in Colchester Castle, we have the painting Walton Bridges by Turner. And so we worked with a couple of community groups and got them to kind of create responses to that painting. And we left it quite open. And so Autism Anglia have a craft kind of group called Jigsaw that they run in Colchester. And they created the Jigsaw reinterpretation of that painting, as you can see in the slide, with their service users at home. So kind of offering up inspiration more than anything, giving them a painting, giving them an object and saying, how would you respond to this in your own home, is something that we've started doing and definitely will continue doing beyond this year. Creating resources that can be done at home as well. So the lockdown gave us a lot of opportunity to develop some of our learning resources. So we created a series of learning from home resources that are now available on our website. So learning can happen outside of the museum. This is something we'd been wanting to do for a very long time and had unfortunately been failing at because of the responsibilities of ensuring that school visits and other things to the venues themselves continued and were strong. But now we have more and more resources that we can do from a distance. And rather excitingly, last Friday, we had our first ever virtual takeover day with Colchester Museums, which was very, very successful, where we also had Arts Award delivered through the takeover day too. So we engaged with almost 60 school children in year 5 at a school in Colchester, all of it done virtually. And it was really exciting that we can actually now do this. So again, going beyond the boundaries of our museums is something we want to be looking at in the future for engaging with new and different groups. And we've also produced a new digital resource that can go out to schools as well, with the focus of that being a virtual tour of Colchester Castle, which includes elements of our tour, and you can interact with objects as you go around, which will give you, or the teacher more importantly, but whoever wants to be looking at it, will give them inspiration of activities and further kind of research and learning that you can do in the classroom around some of those objects. And also we've had some interventive things as well. So we've had the Windrush banners going up for Black History Month. So like I said, just offering the space sometimes is enough. And then finally, I've mentioned a lot of digital things, so I won't go spend too much time on this, but looking at how we can improve our digital offer to make sure things are kind of going beyond our walls in future. And what I wanted to particularly kind of bring attention to, something that hasn't happened yet but is happening next year, is we are working with Essex Cultural Diversity Project and Essex Book Festival, where we are providing participants in a Rewriting the Archive project with a selection of 40 objects in our collection and getting them to create the interpretation for that will go into a virtual and hopefully physical display in our museums. So they had the trial of this year, and they were very successful that they ended up creating another creative writing session around this. So hopefully next year will be bigger and better, but also not just looking at history, looking at objects with difficult and kind of diverse and complicated and sometimes kind of traumatic and kind of less talked about histories. So slavery is something that will be mentioned, as with the object on the left, but we also have natural science specimens that are relevant to these discussions. So we have the hybrid onager. It was at Colchester Zoo, they're called a zedonk, so it's an onager and a zebra hybrid. We have a fetus preserved in our collections, and using these things to discuss things like hybridization and kind of scientific kind of approaches to various different things, looking at climate change, looking at a lot of different topics that will hopefully stimulate people who have perhaps far more insight than your traditional curator voice, and will give a slightly more insightful and nuanced approach to interpreting museum collections. And so this will be happening next summer. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ben. Really interesting to hear about the different voices. We've had a couple of questions through that I'll pose to you now and we can answer later, but just to give you some time to mull them over. So one of the questions is, do you think there are ways that we can use these tick boxes to advocate for our approaches and work? And the other question is, do you think it's useful to distinguish object and maker voice when it is still mediated by the curator voice? So whilst you mull that over, we'll hand over to our next speakers, Katherine and Stephanie.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to start, but Stephanie is going to share the screen. So bear with us while we sort of work out moving through these slides, but we thought we'd save everyone the pain of us trying to swap properly halfway through. So yeah, it's great to be here to talk about our national programme run through the Courtauld. I'm going to hand over to Stephanie to talk about one of the projects in a bit more detail in a moment, but I just wanted to start by kind of setting the scene and telling you a bit about our overall programme, and then also by telling you about one of the older projects that we did that's been really influential on the work that we do. So we're really trying to get across or trying to think through how we use power and who makes the decisions about our loans programme. So if I can have the first slide, Stephanie. Thank you. So Courtauld National Partners is a 5-year programme of activity spread across the UK, and it's really come about because the Courtauld is closed for a major refurbishment project. So we took that as an opportunity to share our collection. We're quite a small London-based gallery, so a lot of people across the UK have never had a chance to see our works before. And also it gives us the opportunity to share some works that wouldn't always be available for loans and for partnership working either. So we've been able to take some of the sort of masterpieces of our collection, you might say, but also some of the more unusual works that don't get displayed very often out and about during this time. The partnership programme has 3 different strands to it: exhibitions, which we're mainly going to focus on today. People and Places is a programme of activity for schools and volunteers, and the networking and training aspect is really important as well. We try and include all staff and volunteers in that. They are set out as 3 different strands in our plans, but actually in reality they tend to overlap and work together quite often. In terms of the aims of the project, really, basically, we wanted to reach more people and a more diverse array of people by taking our collection sort of on the road and by working in partnership. And we wanted to develop new relationships and really specifically mutually beneficial partnerships with different galleries and museums and other organisations, which can sometimes be overlooked in the more traditional taking things on tour sort of methods. And obviously we want people to enjoy and understand the works in our collection and why we do what we do. Can I have the next slide? Thanks. So these are our principal partners, although we do work with a lot of schools, volunteer organisations and other smaller groups, as I said. The programme itself was really inspired by Samuel Courtauld. He was one of the founders of the Courtauld Gallery, the Courtauld Institute. And he, as well as being a major art lover and big collector who eventually donated his collection to us, was really committed to the idea that art should be shared, and he loaned his own private collection around the country to different exhibitions quite often. As well as being an art collector, he was chairman of Courtauld Limited, which was a huge international company, mainly made textiles, but did also make other items, manufactured all kinds of materials throughout the 20th century. So we chose our partners, or we approached our partners based on a kind of shared heritage. All of these locations have some connection to the Courtauld factories, and obviously we wanted to share with them our art collection as well. Can I have the next slide? Thanks. So these are just a few of our exhibitions. You can see there's a bit of a mix coming through. Some are kind of based on big famous names, others are based on sort of specific themes, and some of them are really about just trying to find interesting approaches or explore new parts of our collection. I think the most important thing to point out, though, about our exhibition and loans programme is it's very much led by our partners. So everything is bespoke and everything is on the table. We're up for discussing any ideas depending on the local context and what's the most relevant. We didn't want to just choose a work and kind of have a take it or leave it approach, or to just send sort of small pieces into existing exhibitions. So it's quite a change in our approach from our previous loan projects. But with all of that in mind, like I said, I wanted to bring in an earlier project which took place in 2018, so a couple of years ago now, but it's been really influential in our thinking about how we can share our collection and how we interpret that and share it as broadly as possible. Can I have the next slide? Thanks. So yeah, I'm just going to talk for a couple of minutes about a collaboration we did with the Harris Museum in Preston. Unfortunately, they couldn't join us today, so hopefully I'll do it justice, but I will run through as much detail as I can. And they really wanted to connect with this idea of both the art of the Courtauld and also their local heritage. So they took a two-pronged approach to exploring the relationships around the former factory site, which is now the Redcar industrial estate. So the first kind of attack, the first prong, was all to do with the social history, and they worked with 6 former employees of the factory to develop an exhibition and a series of events related to the history of the site and its legacy in the local area. So they had memory days, they recorded oral histories, they even had some new acquisitions that came into the Harris collection and worked with those. You can see a few of those things happening in the slide here. Another key part of the project was building connections to the Redcar estate, to the former factory site and its current workers. And so the former employees spent some time at the new industrial estate, tracing the legacy of Courtaulds and meeting the owners and employees of the new businesses based there. Can we have the next slide? So you can see some of that happening here. Some of the former employees with old plans trying to work out where their old buildings were, and also meeting some new employees as well. And there was even a new artwork commissioned from a local photographer to reflect these connections between the old and the new, the site and its textile history. All of the work ultimately fed into and was displayed in the final exhibition that took place at the Harris in 2018. But obviously, part of our loans programme meant that we did want to share something from the Courtauld collection and bring in some of Samuel Courtauld's art into the mix here, and to celebrate those ties between our kind of London-based art gallery and the social history in Preston and around the Harris. Can I have the next slide? So when it came to deciding what was going to be loaned, the Harris really wanted to include workers at Red Scar, both the former employees and the current employees. So through a series of engagement days at the cafe on the site, like a small cafe that the workers go to, they presented a short list of works and had people vote for it. And you can see some of the quite clever advertising that they did there, where they took archive photos of the Courtauld factory and put some of our more famous works in. And so it was really sort of engaging, did take a lot of time, but it really reached some people that don't usually come into the Harris. And also the people, the former employees and their families that went to the reunion events and the memory days also got to vote. So basically the choice was very much made by employees of that particular site. Can I have the next slide? So the final choice was Boudin's Deauville seaside painting, which did surprise us a little bit. It wasn't the most famous or the best known painting on the shortlist, but people seemed really attracted to the seaside scape, reminded them of childhood holidays, and just kind of generally gave them a nice feeling, and they really wanted this to be the painting that they had. And the Harris built a brilliant events program around that with sort of beach themed days and poetry days and so on for the public. But I do think the approach, and you can see it comes through really clearly in one of the advertising posters here, the approach of creating a sense of ownership by the local community was really important. And it really engaged with sort of working class and immigration stories that don't usually get told alongside these kind of big art shows. So both of those things, I think, are at the heart of the Courtauld factory legacy, and therefore at the legacy of our art collection. And although it's not always an obvious link, it's definitely one that we're really keen to pull through and to tell these stories in connection with these artworks. As part of drawing these two worlds together, we did also invite the former employees to come to the Courtauld, so they got to see the art collection and go behind the scenes and have a look at the conservation of this painting too. So we tried to make all these different strands come together as clearly as possible. In the exhibition itself was the painting, but also those other elements I mentioned before. There was history and panels about the Courtauld factory. There was the oral histories that were collected, and they found that this created new audiences, or audiences that might have come to see either the painting or the history exhibition and found themselves engaging with the other thing, and also people who tended to spend a lot of time in the space. And they introduced sofas. Obviously there's all these things to listen to. There were memory boards to share memories as well. So the sort of dwell time was much longer than the average exhibitions. And in total, nearly 18,000 people visited the exhibition. Lots of them were former employees or people with memories of Courtauld who hadn't been to the Harris for a long time. Could the next slide? And just to share with you one of the other lovely things that they did with the exhibition, they took portraits of the former employees in front of the paintings. They kind of have this great memory book that sits alongside the oral histories of the engagement as well. Now, of course, there were some challenges. There were questions about whether a sort of bigger name artist, which weren't particularly popular in the vote, would have been more beneficial for other visitors, or might have brought more visitors into the Harris, and obviously the associations of sort of income and public programs and so on that go with that. Initially, they'd hoped to include the current employees at Red Scar in more of their events programming and volunteering, but because they're workers, their times just couldn't quite align, and that partnership didn't really take off. And because of the timings, it was difficult to sort of keep some people engaged or to trace whether people involved at the beginning came to see the exhibition at the end. Our loans processes, like most people's, involve sort of getting various permissions, various checks, etc. So there was a bit of a gap between the two things happening. So just to wrap up, if I can have the last slide. Thanks. The Harris are still very much in touch with their volunteers, and I've got a really strong relationship with them. And at the Courtauld, we're still working with the Harris as well. We try and make our partnerships fairly long term to get the most out of them. Recently, we collaborated on another exhibition, which actually, because of the coronavirus delays, is still running. So it's all still available online and will be opening again in a couple of weeks, hopefully. But yeah, this exhibition was slightly different. It was about drawing rather than just one big loan. But to keep those links going, we commissioned new work from local artists based around the Red Scar site, including one of the artists, the one in the middle there, spent time with former Courtauld employees who are now restoring a train that used to work on the site, and he documented that project that they're working on. And as part of the opening of the exhibition, there was also a new reunion event for 2020, which commemorated 40 years since the closure of Courtauld's in Preston. So a lot's still going on, and I think one of the most rewarding and long-lasting things to come out of this is the kind of genuine relationships and even friendships that have developed. And you can really see that in the way these former employees are still so engaged with the Harris's work. But I'll leave it there and hand over to Stephanie, who's going to look at one of our more current projects.
Hi, thank you, Catherine. So yes, my name is Stephanie, and I am one of the exhibitions assistants at the Ferens Art Gallery in Hull. For those of you who are not familiar with the Ferens, I will give a brief introduction to us. We were opened in 1927, and the Ferens Art Gallery was gifted to the city by T.R. Ferens, a local industrialist and philanthropist similar to Samuel Courtauld. From the beginning, T.R. Ferens established an endowment fund that has allowed the gallery collection to grow in quality and range. We've acquired and commissioned works by living artists, including likes of Hockney, Rotterdam-based Euro Bic van der Pol, and American photographer Spencer Tunick. Now, the Ferens permanent collection has something for everyone. There's early Renaissance panel by Pietro Lorenzetti, as well as highlights from Frans Hals, Canaletto, Henry Moore, and sculpture from Barbara Hepworth as well. You may have heard of the Ferens from a leading role in Hull City of Culture in 2017, where we hosted Turner Prize as one of our major exhibitions. And we've had a long-standing relationship with the Courtauld Institute with a Monet loan in 2017 as well, and the generous loan of Suzanne's card players as the centerpiece of an exhibition in 2018. So we're very thankful for their continued support. This year, we've seen the beginning of another wonderful project together. As Catherine mentioned, we are one of the national partners in the Courtauld project. And for us, it started back in January. The Courtauld presented us with 7 works by well-known French Impressionist painters. And the challenge was to decide which one of the 7 we wanted as centerpiece for our project. No easy feat, as you can imagine. But there's something that you should know about the Ferens, and that is that we try to give every opportunity for young people to have their say in what happens at the gallery. We host a young people's creative collective named the Future Ferens, which sees volunteers aged 16 to 25 engage with culture. Among many of the projects in the past, they've curated exhibitions, designed marketing, hosted events in the gallery. It's a great programme, although I am slightly biased myself, as I was part of the Future Ferens, and that gave me the opportunity to gain the skills for my job at the minute. But in order to truly represent young people's decisions in the gallery, we gave the choice of which of the 7 Impressionist paintings to have in the project over to them. The aim was to get the young people of Hull to vote on which painting they wanted for the focus of the project. Earlier this year, before everything got turned upside down, we joined forces with some of our Future Ferens and took scale reproductions of the 7 Impressionist artworks on the road outside of the gallery. We went to where the young people were in the city. So first we visited our local college, where we hosted pop-up voting stations and workshops with some of their fine art students, and both undergrad and masters. We also visited the University of Hull and the Students' Fair, where we recorded voting vox pops, reaching the students' opinions and how they wanted to cast their votes. We also took the reproductions for a week residency at the Warren, which is a youth centre and recording studio. And this is where the young people in their community could get familiar with the paintings, sit with them for a week, and then after that week, they cast their vote as well. Young people in every location, whether they knew about the Ferens or not, had their chance to cast their vote. Now, inside the Ferens, we invited in groups of young people from local charities, many of whom had not set foot inside the gallery before. We ran workshops introducing young people to Impressionism, giving them a chance to test out their artistic skills in the Impressionist style. They got to discuss the artworks with their peers, and they got to cast their vote too. And you may ask, did the young people know who the Impressionists were? Did they know who the artists were, or even had they seen the artwork before? And generally, the answer was no, not many. So we enlisted the help of some students from York University so that they could write accessible introductions to the paintings. They condensed down reams of art historical knowledge into bite-sized chunks so that young people could digest it. Some people, however, were perfectly happy casting their vote purely on their personal reaction to the composition in front of them, and that was fine too. For this project, we also wanted to take the opportunity to give more in-depth training to young people and generate more opportunities to hear from them. So we hosted a free curatorial course with colleagues from the rest of the museum service in Hull as well. The young people took part in sessions describing artworks, working with artists. They examined ways of learning in the museum, sharing work, and socially engaged practice. They tried their hand at putting on exhibitions and looked at how we can together develop a young person's advocacy voice for selecting work in the gallery. This was really valuable in sharing knowledge from both sides, and it gave a platform, an opportunity for the attendees to gain confidence in sharing their opinions too. And you guessed it, they got to vote as well. Now, thankfully, our voting programme finished 2 weeks before the first lockdown, and the chosen painting was, of course, Claude Monet's Antibes from 1888. So we lightly gathered some qualitative feedback from the voters, and they commented that the painting made them want to explore the world and escape Hull. They found it relaxing, beautiful, warm, and reminded them of mindfulness, which seemed a very fitting choice of painting for a troubling time for many. So over the summer, we started the next phase of the project. With the future Ferens, we began to start the groundwork to produce a final output dependent on the COVID restrictions that we have in place. We put a call out on social media and to our Future Ferens mailing list for a group of young people to get together and work together on the next phase of the project. The group was gathered by 8 of them, with 6 that attend meetings regularly. and we have met weekly or fortnightly over Zoom for the past couple of months. Firstly, the Future Ferens looked at all the voter feedback and they discussed their own reactions to the painting too. From here, they decided that it would be beneficial to explore mindfulness practice as a way of appreciating art. They were interested in the meditative side of Monet's Antibes, how it connected to nature, how it made you slow down and be in the moment with the painting. We then looked at artworks in the Ferens permanent collection, which would work well with the Monet and in that theme. Future Ferens used Art UK and the online curation tool to explore the collection and group together artworks that complemented the Monet. Despite not actually having physical access to the stores, the Art UK site provided a chance for them to explore hundreds of paintings in the comfort of their own home. And they have written blogs and done their own research that has been shared on our personal Basecamp site for future use. Now, there's obviously downsides to delivering a programme online, and we found it's harder to generate the connection and relationship with the volunteers that we have. But the Future Ferens have been brilliant. They've worked really hard. They've attended the training that we've done, and they are continuing to produce outputs for the project as well. So we're really excited to see the project finale, and you'll have to keep your eyes peeled to what's happening in 2021. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie and Katherine. So I think we're going to move on to a Q&A session now. So I think we're just waiting for Katherine and Ben to join us back on the screen. Ben, I asked you a couple of questions before we heard from Katherine and Stephanie. So hopefully you've had a chance to think about those. So just to recap for everyone, do you think there are ways that we can use tick boxes to advocate our approaches and work?
Yeah, so my comment on that was sort of aimed more at funders than at museums. I think funders need to start to look at more kind of ways in which projects can be used. So in terms of the tick boxing, I feel like that should be a bare minimum. If you're doing a project, engaging with diverse audiences should be a prerequisite for whatever. So stop making projects that are like, work with women now, work with LGBT people now, work with Black people now, because that's not the approach that should be taken. All of those groups should be included in everything. If anything, we should have a work with non-white, cis, straight men now, as a thing, because I think a lot of the projects that people are doing across the country are kind of trying to redress that balance. We all know our museums and galleries are overrepresented with certain people, and so what we're trying to do is redress that balance. What we should be looking at is innovative ways in which we're doing that. And I think there are a lot of museums and galleries now that are starting to think of exciting ways of engaging with those different groups. And that's where funders need to be looking. It's the approaches rather than the people, because the people should be included no matter what.
Thank you. So now I've got a question for everyone. So jump in whoever wants to first. So when you first approached potential partners, did you come up against any museum or art gallery stereotypes? And if so, how did you encourage people to see the project as something relevant for them?
Well, I can chip in with that one. I think not too controversial to say that the Courtauld as a gallery can be stereotyped quite a lot. You know, we have a reputation for having a lot of sort of old master impressionist sort of works, rather than being a very sort of contemporary new space. So there are some challenges there to overcome, that we're not just a really elite gallery for kind of quiet contemplation all the time. We do engage in other ways. We haven't had anyone outright be, no, we don't want to work with you. Obviously, we have managed to find common ground with everyone. And I think the kind of approach of also being aware of our own legacy through the kind of industry has given us a new way to talk to people as well. So that helps to overcome some of the barriers sometimes. We're sort of going in, talking about history, and then bringing the sort of art side of things in later. So I think the key thing really is to just be open to having conversations. If we don't go in with too many preconceived ideas, it's much easier to find that middle ground, I think.
Yeah, I think for us, when we're approaching partners, we're very keen to not say we have this like part, this piece that you can fit into, and this is how you're going to fit. We're very keen to go and say, okay, this is the opportunity. What will work for you? What can we do to support you? So for when we approached with the college, they said, well, actually, it'll be really useful for you to come and give careers talks to our students that are going in. And will that fit in with your project? When we did when we had the reproductions that went on a week residency for the youth centre, that came out of the conversations with the young people saying, well, I don't know right now which one I want to vote for. Can I sit with it for a while? And so, yes, have them for a week. Look at it during your lunch breaks. See what you think. Research it if you want to. Like, sure, have them for a week, and then we'll come back afterwards. It really did depend on how comfortable they were to how much interaction we gave as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. I think the vast majority of my kind of what you'd call community engagement work over the last few years has been developing relationships, even if there's not necessarily been an end goal to them yet. And there are groups that I work with who we haven't done any projects or exhibitions or anything, but the idea is that they want to be engaged with museums, and at some point there will be an opportunity, and they're already on board and they're already willing, and they understand how the organization works. And so it'll be easier for them to seamlessly kind of feed into any work that we're doing.
Great, thank you. So next question for everyone. Has the public work you've done influenced how documentation is recorded on your databases or in policies?
Well, from our point of view, we're still kind of midway through our national kind of programme work. So we're still sort of thinking about how we might bring things together at the end. But I think in terms of things like policies, it's really influenced our general approaches to thinking about what we can achieve and how we reach out to other groups. So we are looking at things like how do we update our loans policies so that it's much easier for people to come to us with ideas and to reach out to us rather than it kind of being a top-down partnership model quite often. Obviously, to some extent, that's been led by the funding, and I do think some new approaches from funders would be great to allow you to sort of develop conversations and be a bit more open. But we're hoping to kind of feed that openness and the willingness to listen to other people into all of our kind of policies and approaches across the board.
Yeah, Go on, Ben.
I think it has not. Whether we've actually started doing anything yet or not is another question. But we've definitely, especially kind of around contemporary collecting and telling stories of the present and things like that. That's something that we've really been thinking about lately, and how our documentation and kind of records and things can be used. And again, like I mentioned about the multiple voices, how are we going to capture that? If an object is used in a display that has interpretation made by someone else, how do we include that voice in our records? So it's not just the curator voice in the documentation, it's other people's voices as well.
Yeah, I think similar to what Ben was saying, really, we are still learning. And I don't think anyone really stops learning, do they? I think you just continue to build on from strength to strength. And what we are doing a lot in the gallery and our service is really bringing people in at the beginning of projects. And that's something that we've done for a while, and something that we're growing and learning the best practice ways to do it. But not having all the decisions laid out first, but actually bringing them in at the decision-making time. And that's so important for the successful project, but also just to be able to resonate with people that are coming to the gallery. And similar to what Ben was saying, the Colchester Speaks projects, the voices of people outside the gallery, being able to put them into the gallery and record them so that we can build this whole story of Hull and people in Hull, and bringing those stories together alongside our collections is so valuable. Yeah, definitely.
You've all talked a lot about different partnership working and kind of building up those relationships. How are you embedding that work and ensuring that those relationships that you've built, that the partners aren't kind of dropped? Because it's natural for different people to want to drop in and out as their life changes, but then you can have longer term relationships, and often when we get project funding, you know, we can pick people up for something and then drop them a couple of years down the line.
So the thing that I kind of do, and it seems a bit simplistic maybe, but I just keep in touch with them. Like every month or so, I'll send an email saying, how are things at whatever. If they're part of an organization, I'll say how are things part of the organization. If they've been involved with something else as a separate kind of thing, I'll say kind of let them know various things that are coming up at the museum, because that's the thing, like we might not think that there is a link in a project that's coming up to something that someone else is doing, but they might say, oh, that's interesting, actually I know that so and so has been working on this thing, do you want to work with them? So just maintaining conversation. And we're lucky in Colchester, there's quite a few networks already, so kind of attending those meetings, going to like different groups and things like that, even virtually at the moment, but kind of going to those things and just keeping your presence. It's more about museums keeping their presence known within the community rather than trying to keep the people coming to the museums or galleries in that sense, I think.
Yeah, I think it's quite similar for us. Is the staying in touch, it's the keeping people sort of networked, talking to people all the time, and not just using us as the linchpin at the Courtauld. We try, we have events where all of our partners get to meet each other as well, and they have gone off and formed relationships, without us, but all really beneficial to kind of for people to be sharing their experiences and working together. And this year has been a tricky year for lots of people, so it's kind of thrown some of those assumptions about just getting everyone into a room together a little bit, but we've still tried to do as much as possible to keep people networked in, sharing what they're doing and talking to each other, because as Ben said, you never know who's actually working on similar things or where the next idea is going to come from.
Another question, I think we've got time probably for one more question. Did you sorry, just trying to form this into a proper question. Did you track if new visitors were attracted as a result of the projects that you did?
That's a tough one. So for us, it's hard to do that without having a person stationed at the display or exhibition or whatever, not 24/7 because the museums aren't open that long, but the whole time, asking every single person that visits why they were there. It's hard to know that. I mean, we do. So one thing that we do offer is anyone who's been involved with a project or an exhibition or display can come. Because so for us, Colchester Castle is the only paid venue, the venue you have to pay for to go into. We will offer them and a guest or family or whatever to come along for free to visit what's been produced at the end of it. So we know for a fact that those people have come specifically because of that one thing. But it is very hard to monitor that sort of thing, I think, in exhibitions and displays. We've done similar things in the past where we went to a festival years and years ago. We did a road trip. Colchester Museums and Museum of London did a thing at Latitude Festival, and we gave out vouchers there to try and track people who had seen us at the festival, who then that turned into a visit to the museum. And even that had its complexities because they might have lost the voucher, but then was like, oh, I'll still go anyway. And then so how do you know that those people have there? And there may be more people who didn't take a voucher who had seen us there who then came along anyway. So it's quite tricky to monitor that, I think.
Yeah, we also try and monitor, but I don't think we do it with any accuracy at all. We have feedback forms, in gallery spaces, visitor books, that kind of thing, that do ask before today, had you seen any of the Courtauld collection, or had you seen this artist, or had you visited whichever of our partners we're working with before. The general sort of figures we get from that suggest that most people are new to Courtauld collections, particularly the further away you get from London. But a mixed picture when it comes to partners. So it's anecdotally from that and from the visitor assistants and front of house staff, it seems like it has an impact, but I don't think we could 100% sort of say for sure, just because with free entry, it's so hard to monitor exactly who's visiting and why.
Yeah, I think that same situation for us really, and we do try our best, as both of you have said. And I think also it sort of goes back to that previous question you said about how do you keep volunteers engaged project for project. We keep inviting them back, and I'd hope that we capture everyone in that invitation back to say visit an exhibition or see a project and outputs. And so we can track to a percentage, but again, there's so many people that circle round or decide to come up for a future project and start the relationship again. So it's hard to 100% track from start to finish, but we're also really keen on getting feedback from the volunteers. So if they've started a project and come to see the end output, we really want to hear their qualitative feedback, what they actually think, not just a checkbox exercise, but what did they learn and what can we learn from them as well at the end for the next project.
Great. Well, I think that's all we've got time for today. So I'd like to thank Stephanie, Katherine and Ben for joining us today, and for everyone for joining us online. Our next session is Wednesday, the 2nd of December at 6 p.m. and we'll be looking at sharing power. So do please join us live for that, or catch up online at your own leisure. But otherwise, thank you very much for everyone for coming.